A knight's knees are digging into his horse's ribs. He has slowly noticed that the ribs of the horse have been protruding over time. He looks around him in the desertous wasteland and wonders why he has come this far. He misses his family. His mind drifts back to the days of him feasting in great halls of stone castles back home in France. But quickly his mind snaps back to the windswept desert and the thirst that is burning him from the inside out. He set out years ago looking for glory and to restore the Holy Land to Christendom, but now it seems that his starving caravan may only find their deaths. In the distance, he hears the jeers of the Seljuk Turk raiding party, and he knows what this means. He has faced them before, but not like this. He is weak and starving, yet still he places his hand on the hilt of his sword, and he looks up to the heavens above and asks for forgiveness, because he knows what is about to happen. Within minutes, the starving caravan of Crusader knights is decimated, thousands of kilometers away from home. The knight lays on the dusty desert floor with his throat slit, and in the last moments of his life, in his eyes, a smile creeps across his face, because he knows that the Pope has granted him access to eternal paradise. Hello and welcome, I'm the Knight of History, and this is part number 2 of the Crusader story. It's a fascinating story of betrayal, glory, and people attempting to do what they felt was right. And in this episode, we are going to look at the First Crusade. But if you haven't watched part number 1 yet, I suggest you go and do that first, because we talk about the entrance of the Islamic world and its importance of its culture. Now, let's get into it. The area around the city of Jerusalem is known as the Holy Land, and it's a place of major religious importance to the three Abrahamic religions. The Christians felt that Jerusalem is the home of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus Christ is believed to be entombed and resurrected. For the Muslims, it is the city of the Dome of the Rock, where the Prophet Muhammad is believed to ascended into heaven. And finally, for the Jews, it is the home of the Wailing Wall, where the last surviving parts of the King Solomon's temple. Jerusalem was rarely a prosperous and peaceful place. It was a place where pilgrims could come and go, see the holy sites, and it grew in terms of its trade as well. And all around it was extraordinarily humble and a nice place to go. By 638 AD, the Islamic world had expanded to Jerusalem and it took over the city. The Fatimids took over the city, in fact, and they welcomed everyone in. They understood the importance of this city for everyone, allowed pilgrims to come in. The three religions lived there in harmony and in peace for centuries under the Shia Muslims of the Fatimid rule. But that was all about to change. There were these nomadic tribes in the Middle East, and they really started to blossom, and eventually they unified. These nomadic tribes were warriors on horseback, and they used bows and arrows, and it's probable, I say probable because it has not yet been proven, that around the 8th century, one of the Jewish tribal leaders called Seljuk from the Turk region, hint hint nudge nudge, travelled around the parts of the northern Islamic world looking for grazing grounds for his large herds of cattle, when he came across the Islams, and he embraced their faith and converted to Islam, but Sunni Islam specifically. This group of nomadic tribes developed year after year. They took the name of their original tribe leader, Seljuk, and the region he came from, Turk, and they got their name, the Seljuk Turks. And eventually they grew large enough to have an empire of their own. In fact, this empire grew so large that by 1079 they started to focus on the ancient city of Jerusalem, where they seized control and, together with their military might, kicked everyone out. But let me know if you want to know how they did this by commenting down below. Let me know if you want an actual video on the Seljuk Turks. The Seljuk Turks were Sunni Muslims, and they weren't so keen on everyone being there. They just wanted Jerusalem for the Muslims. They didn't want anyone coming in on pilgrim, they just wanted it for their own. The harmony of the city completely fell. Many of the Christians and Jews were chased away. Even more concerning was the fact that the Seljuk Empire was expanding so much, getting so strong through Asia Minor, it began to threat the Christian city of Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantine emperor who lived in Constantinople was an emperor called Alexos I, and he reached out to his Christian brothers in Western Europe and asked them for help. This is where we see the Pope Urban II, the leader of the Catholic faith and Christendom as a whole, speak out. He traveled to the French town of Clermont, where he would give one of the most important speeches in medieval history. On the 27th of the 1095, he gathered around the most important and powerful bishops, nobles, and knights of Europe, and he called for a holy war, willing them on to create a giant army, to travel east, defend Constantinople, defeat the Seljuk Turks, and conquer the Holy Land for Christians. 3 tasks. Knowing that he would need enormous numbers, he wanted to make everything a little bit sweeter, to bring people in so that they would have many people taking part. And he promised anyone that took part would be given forgiveness for all previous sins and granted a place in heaven, in paradise. With cries of Deus lo vult, God wills it, those who were in the meeting tore their clothing off into crosses and sewed it onto their tunics. To fight in the Crusades thus became known as taking the cross. Medieval Europe was, of course, deeply religious. People flocked to take the cross. No matter their background, they were criminals, women, children, knights, noblemen, whoever they were, they formed a force of around 60,000 from all around Europe. It's the largest force in Europe since the Roman Empire, and around 1 in 10 of these people were actually highly skilled knights. The rest were foot soldiers or the supporting force. If you want to know more about knights, I've done a video on them. Go find it in the description down below. This massive army was led by a group of noblemen from around Europe, including an old knight and count called Raymond of Toulouse, Robert the Duke of Normandy, the son of William the Conqueror, the King of England. Another was Bohemond of Toronto, a giant southern Italian who was one of the most feared knights in Europe at the time. And another leader was someone that was a French Duke of Lower Lorraine called Godfrey of Bouillon. He had a strong force with him, around 40,000 people, and he had the Pope's backing. Many of his force, by the way, were ex-cons, they were ex-criminals. Anyway, he and his giant force made their way across Europe to the Holy Land. But while they were going across Europe to the Holy Land, they pillaged a number of villages for nothing. These people were criminals. However, by August 1096, this massive Crusader army had made their way to Constantinople. Some came by sea, some came over the lands, but they arrived in the city. And when they did, the emperor was, of course, glad to see them, and he supplied them with food, riches, and a number of strange gifts. This whole situation was a little bit strange because the emperor wanted to keep everyone happy. The leaders of the crusade didn't always get along with each other. In fact, they all wanted to be the main leader of the crusade. And in addition to this, the emperor Alexos knew that the Crusader army had been raiding villages as they went across Europe. So he wanted them out of his city as quickly as possible. So what he did was he took each of the Crusader leaders into different rooms filled with riches and gold and silver and jewels, and said to each and every single one of them, listen, you know, we all know that you are the leader. You're the main leader of the Crusades. And you can have all these riches in thanks for protecting us the Constantinople people from the Seljuk Turks and retaking the Holy Land. Of course, Alexis knew what he was doing here. He wanted the city that he was in charge of protected, and the people in the city to be protected from this massive army. It's even rumored that some of these riches were even poisoned to the more violent and criminal of leaders so they could get out of the city. Nonetheless, the majority of the army took the supplies and riches offered to them and left. Anyway, by 1097, with their supplies dwindling, the Crusaders came across the ancient city of Nicaea in the Holy Land, where they besieged it and quickly took control of the city through force and handed it back to the Byzantine emperor. They quickly moved on to the next city in their crosshairs. Some, however, went off to conquer other cities, but we're going to focus on the main Crusader force army. And after an 8-month besiegement of a fortified city called Antioch, they took control of it. But all was not well. You see, the Holy Land was a desert after all. It was hot. They were running out of food and supplies, and they had to resort to looting tribes and villages nearby to survive. Even during the winter months, the Crusaders were starving in their newly conquered city of Antioch. There were even reports of some people eating the seeds from horse manure to survive. With this horrible, slow death, people even were forced to turn to cannibalism to survive. But still, the Crusades went on. Once this depleted force had made their way to their goal, the city of Jerusalem, on the 7th of June 1099, after 3 years and 3,000 miles of grueling warfare, they were exhausted. There were so many casualties and desertions on the way that this number, 60,000, had dwindled down to 15,000 with only 1,300 knights. They camped outside the city wall for a month just to regain their strength, but more importantly, they started to build siege engines. One of the leaders that I spoke about, a knight called Godfrey of Bouillon, called together his troops and got them to build a large siege tower over 20 meters tall. On the night of the 14th of July 1099, he snuck this massive siege tower around to the north face of the walled city because it was less defended. The next morning, on the 15th of July 1099, Godfrey and his troops broke through the Muslim defenses and flooded into this ancient city. This, unfortunately, is where we see the real brutality of the Crusades come to light. They massacred the entire population, pretty much. No matter what religion, women, children, men, it did not matter. By the end of this massacre, the streets ran in rivers of blood as 10,000 people had been killed. There were even accounts 6 months after the Crusades had taken place and had taken this city that there was a stench of death and decay coming from the city miles away. This brutal butchery by the Crusaders shocked the entire Islamic world. I was actually speaking to a friend and colleague of mine, hello Harry, about what their favorite crusade was, and we both came to a similar conclusion. Although this crusade, as we see with all crusades, was full of brutality, death, diversion, and pretty horrible to say the truth, the First Crusade met its goals, it met its targets. It defended Constantinople, it defeated the Seljuk Turks, and it conquered the Holy Land for Christians. Perhaps it's hard to say that it's my favorite crusade, but it was a successful crusade. However, there's so much more to this story, and it does not end here. So please tune in for part number 3 of the Crusader story. I really hope that you enjoyed that. Please let me know what you want to watch in the future by commenting down below. Like, comment, subscribe, the more you know.